Today is Saturday, February 13th, 1999. We are with Benny Cardon, Norris City Manager, in the McNeely Municipal Building at Norris. And he's going to share some of his experiences in this area.
I am Benny Cardon, and the Norris Water and City Manager. I've been an employee here for the past 34 years. I was born and raised in Anderson County in the Clear Branch community below Lake City. I'm married to Betty Hammock Cardon. Betty was raised in the Bethel community just outside of Norris. We have a son, Monty, a daughter, Misty. And my early ties to Norris, my influences came primarily from my father. My dad was William Claude Cardon, and his dad, Jim Cardon, had a farm over around Island Home Church inside what is now the city of Norris. The house sat near the church where the loblolly pines are. My grandfather had 12 children he raised there. And when TVA came in and bought them out, some of the children were still small and some were adults living on the place. And all of them except one aunt moved to Clear Branch below Lake City. My dad was about 21-year-old at the time, and he worked some in the construction of Norris Dam and I guess some of the satellite projects going on affiliated with the dam. And my earliest memories of Norris and influences came from my dad, because when I was a boy growing up, he'd bring us to Norris in the late 40s and early 50s, and we'd ride through town, and I was always impressed with the cleanness, the neatness, the flowers, and it was a little different than other communities, and it always stood out in my mind. And when I was a boy, he'd bring me over to the old home site, and we would hunt on the property across the road where you could legally hunt on the west side of 441. He'd bring us over to Clear Creek, and we'd camp out a night or two at a time, and with my brother and my cousins, and we did this for 2 or 3 summers, and we'd venture out in the watershed, a place that I really love today. And I even have memories of coming to work with my uncle, Ralph Cardon, who worked for TVA Nursery below the dam. There used to be a nursery below the dam, a building set across the street from where the fish lab is. And he worked there for many years, and later with the forestry. But my cousin and I would come to work and spend the day rambling in Clear Creek and venturing into town and in the watershed. So I had fond memories. Then my dad would tell me stories about the valley before TVA, and he usually talked about the hardships, the floods, the poor ground, the erosions, and then told about the impact that TVA had with the community. Before TVA, he said we had very limited electricity in the valley, in the rural areas. There were almost no jobs. I think people were happy, but they were in poverty. So he taught me that TVA was a great thing for the valley, and I was always influenced with that. And so I continued living here in the area with a positive attitude to my parents and grandparents about TVA. I didn't know any animosities for people purchasing the land and running people off the lakes and this type of thing, but it was always positive. So I continued living here in the community until I was about 22 years of age. And I was just married, and my son was not yet born, and I had a job that I wasn't really satisfied with, and Carlos Phillips, some people know him as Corky Phillips, lives on Pine Road in Norris, and he was the superintendent of the water and sewer for the Clinton Utility Board. And Corky stopped by my house one day and asked me if I'd be interested in coming to Norris and maybe working for the Norris Water Commission. And that sounded good to me. I didn't know what it was all about, but he said, I'll set up a meeting, and you and I'll go to a board meeting and meet with the commissioners and discuss what they'd like to do. So I came to a board meeting, and the chairman of the board at that time was Rex Elder. Rex Elder was the chief branch manager of the TVA lab on Pine Road. He was one of the top 10 hydraulic engineers in the world at that time. But he was a common person, and he volunteered a lot of time to the city, and he felt like TVA's purpose of being here was to assist cities in working with them. The other 2 commissioners on the board were Bill Jennings and Berger Ellison. good commissioners. At that time, Mr. Arnius was the city clerk manager, acting water superintendent, and the secretary and treasurer. And when I went to the board meeting, Rex explained to me that they had a water system here that had non-approved water, and the wastewater system was dilapidated. And they were going to have to do something about getting the water approved. They were losing about 60% of the water. They'd like to take a young man and train him and bring him up through the system that would bring us back a quality system. And I was pretty naive about the water business, but we talked, and I agreed to take the job. And Corky Phillips took me to Clinton and worked with me in the wastewater plant for about 2 months. Then I came back to work up here, and I was given a set of keys. No one took me out and showed me anything, just showed me the gate. And I started working at the wastewater plant, and it was in a dilapidated plant. It was an Imhoff system. It was built by TVA and designed by Dr. Karl Imhoff of Germany. It was one of 5 plants like this in the United States. And it was a primary treatment plant that probably met the criteria for the 20s and 30s and maybe in the 40s. But we had a new group of people that we had to be responsible to, and it was called stream pollution. Later on, it became EPA, and we wasn't in compliance on anything. And anytime we had problems at the water plant, like a rain, we were drinking turbid, muddy water. So I started working at the wastewater plant, trying to upgrade our existing facilities, and operated the water plant somewhat in my spare time, along with a person by the name of Chuck Lambden. Charles Lambden was a person that I had great respect for. Chuck worked here for many years for TVA, and when it was privately operated, he worked here, then again for the city. He didn't want to take the responsibilities to operate the plants, but he was an excellent plumber and good repairman and a good person. So he had a lot of influence on me. So the first couple of years I spent operating the water and wastewater plant, upgrading it to the best of my ability. But in 1967, we got plans and specifications for a new water treatment plant. And the water treatment plant was called a pressure filter system. The state of Tennessee didn't like the system, didn't want to approve it. But Irwin, Tennessee had built a plant like ours, and I visited Irwin and seen that it was a good operated plant, and the operators liked it there. And finally, we convinced the state of Tennessee to approve it. So we built the plant and completed the plant in about 1968. And the new plant, we started feeding alum and soda ash to remove the turbidity and to adjust the pH. We pre- and post-chlorinated the system. We started adding fluoride to the water. We were some of the earlier people to feed fluoride in the area, even before Knoxville. And within a year, I had gotten my temporary water plant operator's license. It took 6 years at that time to get a license to operate a water plant, 6 years for a wastewater plant. But within 2 years, I also had my temporary wastewater plant operator's license. And in 68 and 69, we had the state to come back in and inspect the water system. And they give us a 97 or 98 rating. And we've continued with a high rating for the last 30 years and never have had a positive bacteria sample collected. The last 6 or 7 years, we received a score of 100. And on the wastewater end of it, I spent a lot of time at the wastewater plant in the early days. The problems there was infrastructure wasn't in good shape. We didn't have a good laboratory. We had odor problems. So we started looking at building a wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater plant was designed by Wiedemann Singleton in Atlanta and built by Smith and Lovelace out of Kansas City. We built this wastewater plant and put it online in 1969 and 70. And we're still operating the same plant today, even though we've done some modifications. I believe in 1972, the East Tennessee Basin said it was perhaps the best operated wastewater plant in East Tennessee. And that's the result of having good commissioners, good employees all those years. And some of the employees that we had that were key people was people like Lefty Warwick. He worked here about 25 years. Dewey Bailey, he's worked here 30 years and still here and fixing to retire in just a few months. We've had good office people. During the tenure here of the office people, we've only had 4 people that was office managers. And that was Jenny Halsley, Betty Hammond, Colleen Shepard, and now Darlene Buckner. My key commissioners have been, even to date, the people that are there now are Hank Julian, Bill Grieve, and Dean Harshbarger. And they've been real flexible and allowed me the freedom to work within the system and upgrade it over the years. We've improved the water loss from what it used to be at 60%, and now it's reduced down into the low teens, which is acceptable. We still have some problems within the sewer collection system, but one thing that we've still got is probably one of the best water sources in the East Tennessee, perhaps in the state. We're still using, even today after 60 years, the water source comes out of the Norris watershed out of Clear Creek Spring. It's protected by approximately 2,200 acres. And we're even using the same high service pumps to pump it from the water plant to Reservoir Hill into a 250,000 gallon tank. But we've also added a 500,000 gallon tank, which gives us about a 2-day supply. And going back to the wastewater, the problems we have there is called infiltration and inflow. We have excessive rainwater getting into the sewer system after hard rains, and it's hard to meet the stream standards and eliminate washouts from the plant. So over the next few years, we need to spend approximately $1 to $1.5 million to upgrade this. We're attempting right now to get a grant for $500,000 through the state of Tennessee to upgrade the sewer collection system, which would certainly help us. But I continued working primarily with the water until about 1993. And several opportunities I'd had over that period of time to go to work as city manager. I refused it in the 70s. I refused it again in the 80s. But when Randy Kunkel got ready to leave in 93, he came to me and really encouraged me to take this job. He said, you know, you should be the city manager. You can do the job. And I knew that I could, but I didn't want to get involved in what I thought might be political. But Richard Dyer was mayor, and he came to me, and we had a meeting and asked me if I'd be interested and encouraged me. And I said, I'll think about it. Then I went back and thought about it, and Richard Dyer came to my house one night, and we talked for a couple of hours, and he encouraged me to take the water and city manager. By doing this, this would improve my retirement, put a lot of extra responsibilities on me, but with the key people, I thought I could do it. And for the last 5.5 years, I've been water and city manager. We've not had a tax increase the last 5 years, but we've continued to go forward and progressed within the community. We've been able to upgrade the McNeely Municipal building that was donated to us. We've got a place for the Historical Society and a new location for a library. We've improved our parks. We've had a lot of asphalting programs. We've had some development along 61 that's broadened our tax base. So there's been a lot of positive things. I've worked under 3 mayors since I've been city manager. That's Richard Dyer, Russ Manning, and Jerry Crossnow, and now Richard Dyer mayor again. In fact, the city of Norris has had 14 mayors in the tenure of the city since the city was incorporated, and I've worked under 12 of them. I worked under everybody with the exception of Mr. Van Rensselaer and Paul Newman. And I think Norris is a great place to live, and I often go to meetings in the Tennessee Water Works Association and the Rural Water Association and the American Water Works Association, and people keep saying, why are you still in that little town in Norris? I don't understand. You have opportunities to move up to larger cities. And it's pretty hard to explain sometimes about the environment here and the people you work with and the dedication from people and the ties you have with the town. But the people have been good to me also. But I did turn down a job with the Clinton Utility Board as a superintendent. I've turned down a manager's job for North Anderson County Utility Board, and the second largest utility district at the time in Tennessee was West Knox. I turned down the assistant manager there. I turned down been the director of the Rural Water Association in Kentucky, North Carolina, and Utah, and even turned down a farmer's home job that I'd be a national circuit rider. And people might say that'd be difficult to do. It really wasn't. It was opportunities, but I enjoyed living here. I enjoy the environment. I enjoy my activities here in the community. I enjoy the Norris watershed, and the people have been good to me. Here in the community, I've been involved with the Norris First Baptist Church for about the last 25 years, and I've had most jobs within the church. I've been a member of the Gideon International. I used to work the Shriner paper sales in Norris in the 60s and 70s when we actually went door to door to canvass the people. I member of the Valley Lodge at Andersonville. I coached Little League baseball for the Lions Club and older baseball teams for the Optimus Club. And then I coached basketball from the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade all the way through the 9th grade for the Optimus Club when my kids were involved. And so there's been a lot of activities that's kept me happy here. And basically, if I was doing it over again, I wouldn't change anything because I'm happy with what I'm doing. As I said, I'm an avid outdoorsman, and I spend a lot of time in the watershed, either hiking. That's a good way to release stress. I enjoy hunting. I even go out and see the wildflowers. That's one of my highlights in the spring, and looking for morels. And that's kept me in Norris because of the people that I've worked with and all those key people and good commissioners and good councilmen and other board members. But in order to maintain our standard of living in Norris, we got to continue to have some slow rate of growth. Anything that doesn't grow, it dies. I don't think we need to boom in residential growth, and we're not. We've got another 600 or 700 acres that's privately owned that could be developed. What we really have got to depend on, we've got about 1.5 miles of road frontage on Highway 61 that should be primarily rezoned commercial. We can broaden our tax base as the opportunities arise. We can collect sales tax and other taxes that come with businesses. Hensley's business has been a big asset to the city. In order to maintain our standard of living, we need to continue to zone the property the way it should be in order to attract businesses. One of the biggest setbacks that occurred here in Norris was in 1978. The old Norris Community Building was sort of the heart of the community. At that time, the city offices operated out of there. We had a library. There was a Mrs. Snow operated a kindergarten. The little theater was there. We had a room where the women's club met, the bridge club, even the scouts had a room, and there was a lot of activity there. And in the basement of the building, the Public Works Department operated out of the one end of the building and the Water Commission out of the other. But when the building burned in 1978, it was a big setback. And it's taken several years to actually recoup from this. The other community building we built in '83 was a start. But now with upgrading of the parks, pulling people together, and the McNeely Municipal Building pulling different groups together, and I really think the future looks bright, and maybe we can come up with a place for the little theater again, which was an active part of the community. But in the future, I would like to see Norris not change a great deal. I would like to see it stay a residential community with the business growth primarily on Highway 61, add a few new houses a year. I don't think Norris will change a lot. There's been a lot of growth in the area in the 70s, then again in the 90s, and we've not got a lot of the influx of the houses, and I think that's good. I would like to see the watershed stay as is. We don't need to promote the use of the watershed to the outsiders. It's been used heavily. I would like to see maybe more foot trail only trails put in, and maybe some shorter trails that loop back to the road, and some parking for older people. And we should never even consider any type of development there.
Okay, we're rolling.
Benny, let's hear about the swimming pool subject. Some citizens are pushing for a municipal pool.
I've talked to the Municipal Technical Advisory Service and also the East Tennessee Development District and asked about a municipal pool for Norris. And they say Norris is just not big enough for a municipal operated pool, that if we have a pool here, it probably should be a corporate pool, have corporate sponsors, or independently, privately owned. The key is finding a location to put the pool. There's been some debate about putting it in the parking lot at one time of the community building, which is not a very desirable place, and it has been brought up now to possibly put the pool next to the tennis courts, utilizing the parking facilities of the tennis court for a pool. But I think what would be most desirable, find a location away from the community building and the city park, and where you could have places like for people to lay down out in the sun. You'd have a place that would be away from the apartments for the elderly, because you feed chlorine gas, and if you should have a chlorine leak, you'd have to evacuate the people. There's a lot to operating a pool. You've got to have a certified pool operator. You've got to have someone that's certified to operate the gas, chlorine gas. So there's a lot to think about. If we have a pool, I just definitely don't think it should be a municipal pool, because other towns like La Follette have had to shut theirs down. Oak Ridge, my understanding, has had to shut down half their pool. So with 1,400 people, it would be hard to operate a municipal pool without losing a lot of money.
What about liability expenses?
Well, if it was city, we'd have to have more employees, and the employees would have to be insured. And of course, if you're using chlorine and lifeguards, it would increase the insurances, so it would be very expensive to operate a small municipal pool. Possibility it could be put even out on the outskirts of town, but under the right conditions, maybe in the island home area. I certainly don't want to see any major development around Norris Freeway. It's been discussed in the past about developing that area, but maybe a pool or maybe something for recreation. But right now, I guess the most difficult thing is to find a site and maybe get a corporate sponsor to build the pool. I met with Russ Allen before he passed away, and he thought the only way it would really work was to get some TVA donated land and get Jim Clayton or Cardon Industries to sponsor it, where their people would have membership, and that would attract enough people to make it feasible to operate.